After my brother's wedding, my parents drove me and my 7-year-old daughter to a remote road and said, "This is where you get off. The house is theirs now." I stood in the dust, clutching my daughter's hand. They didn't know about the hidden inheritance I'd secured. I'm Michael Whitmore, 35 years old, and my own parents threw me and my 7-year-old daughter out of our home the day after my brother's wedding. Before I tell you how I found justice in the most unexpected way, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The engine of my father's sedan was a low hum in the quiet of the evening, the only sound besides the crunch of tires on the gravel shoulder. He pulled over, the car sinking slightly into the soft dirt. Outside, there was nothing but a darkening field and a long, empty road stretching into the Oregon twilight. "This is where you get off," my father, Robert, said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was the same tone he used to read stock prices in the morning paper. I looked at him, then at my mother, Patricia, in the passenger seat. She was staring straight ahead, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap they were turning white. My brother, Nathan, and his new wife, Vanessa, weren't with them. They had done their part yesterday, at the family meeting, where they gleefully announced the house was theirs. This was just the final, brutal act of enforcement. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though a cold dread was already seeping into my bones, thick and heavy like mud. In the back seat, my daughter, Emma, stirred. She pressed her face against the window, her little brow furrowed with confusion. "Daddy, are we going camping? Is this a surprise?" My father turned, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. They were cold like chips of granite. "The house is for Nathan's family now. He has a child on the way. They need the space." "The space?" My voice cracked, the words tearing from my throat. "I've lived there my whole life. Emma was born in that house. I've paid the taxes on it for the last 5 years. I fixed the roof last summer. You've had 7 years of free living while he built his career," my mother said, her voice sharp as broken glass. She finally turned to look at me, but not with sympathy. It was with a strange, hard finality, as if she were looking at a stranger who had overstayed his welcome. She opened her door, walked to my side, and pulled the back door open with a jerk. She handed Emma a small purple backpack. "We packed a few of your toys, sweetheart." They had planned this. The 2 suitcases in the trunk weren't for a trip. They were our eviction notice. My father got out and opened the trunk, pulling out our 2 worn suitcases and my laptop bag. He set them down in the dust next to the road with a dull thud. I was frozen, paralyzed by a mixture of shock and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to love me to protect their granddaughter. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. "You can't do this," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "This isn't you." Robert slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing in the stillness. "It's already done." He got back in the car. Patricia followed, not giving us a second glance. The engine roared to life, and the car pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled over us like a funeral shroud. Emma started to cry, a soft, terrified sound that shattered my heart into a million pieces. I stood there on the side of a deserted road, with my crying daughter, 2 suitcases, and the clothes on our backs. They had taken everything. My home, my security, my past, my family. But as I knelt and wrapped my arms around Emma, holding her tight against my chest, a single thought cut through the despair. A memory of my late wife, Sarah. A secret she'd made me promise to keep. They thought they had taken it all, but they couldn't take what they didn't know existed. In that moment, staring into the darkness where my family's taillights had disappeared, I wasn't just a victim. I was a father with a promise to keep. And they had forgotten about the one thing that could save us. The first call I made was to Jason. He's been my best friend since we were building forts in the woods behind the house. He didn't even let me finish the sentence. My voice was a choked whisper, but he heard the panic underneath. "Where are you? Send me your location." "I'm on my way." There was no hesitation, just immediate, unwavering support. He arrived 20 minutes later, his beat-up Ford Ranger a more welcome sight than any chariot of angels. He jumped out before the engine was even off, his face a mask of fury and concern. He didn't say a word about my tears. He just pulled me into a hard, one-armed hug, then scooped up a still sniffling Emma and carefully buckled her into the passenger seat, treating her like she was made of spun glass. "Monsters," he muttered under his breath as he threw our suitcases into the truck bed. "Absolute, cold-blooded monsters." Jason's house wasn't large, but his guest room felt like the Ritz-Carlton. His wife, Clara, a nurse with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, immediately took over. She drew a warm bath for Emma, found her some of her own daughter's pajamas, and read her a story until her crying subsided, and she drifted off to sleep in a real bed, safe and warm. For the first time in hours, I could breathe. After Emma was tucked in, I sat at Jason's kitchen table, a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands. I just stared at the wall, the events of the day replaying in a horrifying loop. "I don't understand," I kept saying, the words feeling hollow and useless. How could they? How could a mother and father do that to their own son? Jason leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. His usual cheerful face was hard with anger on my behalf. "Mike, I'm gonna be honest with you, man. And maybe I should have said this years ago. I've been seeing this for years. It's been a slow burn. The way they always put Nathan first. The way they treated you like the reliable, unpaid help. He was right. It wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny betrayals I'd ignored for the sake of keeping the peace. That night, trying to find a comfortable position on a lumpy pull-out couch, the past came flooding back, not as warm memories, but as cold, hard evidence in a case that had been building against them my whole life. I remembered a Saturday 2 years ago. A fierce storm had torn a whole section of shingles off the roof of the old Victorian. My father had called me in a complete panic. "You have to get over here, Michael. Right now. The rain's coming into the attic." I canceled my plans, drove over, and spent my entire weekend up on that steep, treacherous roof, replacing shingles under a hot sun, my muscles screaming in protest. When I finally came down, exhausted and covered in tar, I saw my parents through the living room window. They were on a video call, laughing and raising glasses of wine. I heard my father's booming voice clearly through the glass. "Yes, Nathan just closed another huge deal. A real star, that one. Landed a new client worth millions. We're so proud." They never even offered me a glass of water. My mother just opened the back door and said, "Make sure you clean up all that debris in the yard before you leave, Michael. I don't want it killing my roses." At the time, I brushed it off. That's just how they are. Now, I saw it for what it was. I was the handyman, Nathan was the prince. My sweat equity was their expectation. His financial success was their pride. The next morning, as I tried to fix a leaky faucet in Jason's guest bathroom, needing to do something, anything with my hands, the memory hit me so hard I had to sit on the edge of the tub. The constant drip, drip, drip was like a countdown to another memory, another calculated slight. It was Emma's 5th birthday. I had saved up for months to get her the beautiful, multi-story dollhouse she'd been dreaming of. I was so excited to see her face. My parents arrived late, breezing in with a casual air. They handed her a small, carelessly wrapped gift. It was a coloring book and a pack of crayons, the kind you get at the dollar store. An hour later, my mother was on the phone with my aunt, her voice gushing with excitement. "Oh, you won't believe it. Robert and I just put the down payment on a new sports car for Nathan's birthday. He works so hard. He deserves a little something." Emma had been happily playing with her coloring book, oblivious to the disparity. But I wasn't. I saw the massive imbalance, the casual, unthinking cruelty of it. Her love for them was pure and unconditional, but their love for us was clearly not. I even remembered Christmas, just last year. I'd given my parents a beautiful, framed photo of Emma, thinking they'd love it. They thanked me politely and put it on a side table. Nathan gave them a new smart TV. It was the centerpiece of the living room by New Year's. I was expected to mount it on the wall for them. "You're so good with these things, Michael," my father had said. clapping me on the shoulder while Nathan sat on the couch, directing me on where to place it. These memories weren't just sad anymore. They were exhibits. They formed a pattern so clear, so undeniable, I felt stupid for not having seen it sooner. The first practical step was a call to Elaine Martinez. She had been my late wife Sarah's attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had helped us with our wills after Emma was born. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, my throat tight with a mixture of shame and anger. How do you even begin to tell someone this story? Elaine, it's Michael Whitmore, Sarah's husband. I explained the situation, my voice faltering as I recounted the events. She listened patiently, the silence on the other end of the line punctuated only by the furious scratching of her pen. It was the sound of a battle plan being drawn. Michael, she said when I finished, her voice calm but with a steel edge. First of all, I am so sorry this has happened to you. This is unconscionable. It's monstrous. But I want you to listen to me very carefully. Breathe. I took a shaky breath. Before Sarah passed, she made some arrangements. She was a planner. She saw things, Michael. She saw the dynamic in your family. She never wanted to cause a fuss or create tension, so she asked me to keep it quiet. But she inherited a property from her grandmother. It's a small lakeside cabin, about 15 acres of land, just outside of Portland. It's held in a trust for Emma, with you as the sole trustee. The trust also includes a small fund, nothing life-changing, but enough to get you on your feet and cover taxes for a few years. Tears streamed down my face, silent and hot. Sarah, my practical, wonderful, loving Sarah. Even after all these years, she was still taking care of us. I knew about the cabin. I stammered, my voice thick with emotion. We were going to fix it up one day, as a surprise for everyone. A family getaway. I didn't know about the trust fund. The documents are here in my office, safe and sound, Elaine said. It's all yours, Michael. Free and clear. They can't touch it. It is your fortress. It was a lifeline, a real, tangible place to go. A new start, gifted to me by the love of my life. A few days later, after thanking Jason and Clara with promises to repay them, I didn't yet know how I'd keep. I drove a rented U-Haul with our few belongings out to the lake. The cabin was just as I remembered from a visit years ago. Rustic, a little run-down, smelling of pine and damp earth. The wooden porch sagged in one corner, the green paint was peeling like sunburnt skin, and a shutter hung crookedly from a second-story window, like a winking eye. But through the grime-covered windows, I could see the lake, glittering under the afternoon sun. Emma, who had been quiet and withdrawn for days, gasped, her eyes wide. Daddy, is that a real lake? It is, sweetie, I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. And this is our new house. She ran towards the water's edge, her laughter echoing through the trees. For a moment, watching her chase a dragonfly, I felt a sense of profound peace. But that peace was shattered when I walked back to the main road to get the mail. A huge, gaudy sign had been hammered into the ground just a few hundred yards from our new driveway. Lakeside Estates. Luxury homes coming soon. It was a new, high-end development. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The world moved on, building new luxury homes, while mine had been stolen from under my feet. That night, sitting on the dusty floor of the cabin, I looked at the pile of work ahead of me. The peeling paint, the leaky roof, the overgrown yard, the ancient plumbing. It was overwhelming. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Was this it? Hiding away in a broken-down cabin while my brother and his wife redecorated my home, laughing in the rooms where my daughter took her first steps? It was then I realized the cabin wasn't just a refuge. It was a starting point. It was a place to lick my wounds, yes, but it was also a place to plan my battle. They had thrown me out, thinking I would crumble and disappear. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated Sarah's love. And they had grossly underestimated the fight a father has in him when his child's future is on the line. I looked over at Emma, asleep on a mattress on the floor, her face peaceful in the moonlight streaming through the dirty window. This wasn't just about getting back what was mine. It was about showing her that you don't let bullies win. You don't let cruelty stand. You fight back. And I was just getting started. The first few weeks at the cabin were a blur of hard labor and simmering rage. By day, I was a whirlwind of activity. I learned to use a chainsaw to clear the brush that had choked the yard. I patched the leaky roof with tar and sweat. I scrubbed away years of grime, finding solid wood floors beneath layers of linoleum. At night, after Emma was asleep, my second job began. The cabin would fall silent except for the chirping of crickets and the low murmur of my voice on the phone with Elaine Martinez. "We have a case, Michael," Elaine said during one of our late-night strategy calls. Her voice was always a calm anchor in my storm of emotions. "Based on the sheer volume of your financial contributions to the property taxes and maintenance, we can file a lawsuit for financial restitution. But proving fraud on the transfer of ownership, that's harder. It's your word against your father's. A jury might just see a family dispute." "But it's the truth," I insisted, pacing the small living room. "He told me they were insurance papers. He knew Emma was sick. He took advantage of me." "I believe you, Michael. 100%, she said. And hearing those words from someone so sharp and logical was like a bomb on a raw wound. But a courtroom needs more than belief. It needs proof. We need to find a crack in their story, something that proves intent. The day we filed the lawsuit was the day the war officially began. Elaine sent a courier to serve my parents and Nathan with the legal documents at the house on Chestnut Lane. I let myself imagine the scene for a moment. The courier at the door, the thick envelope, the dawning comprehension on their faces. The shock, the indignation, the sheer audacity of the son they had discarded daring to fight back. Their response came a week later, not in a formal legal filing, but in a far more personal and venomous attack. I was up on a ladder, trying to unjam a window that had been painted shut for years, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I saw Nathan's name flash on the screen and my stomach clenched into a tight, hard knot. I almost didn't answer. A part of me just wanted to be left alone. But I knew I couldn't. I had to face this. "What do you want, Nathan?" I said, my voice flatter and colder than I intended. "What do I want?" He laughed, a smug, arrogant sound that grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. "I want to know what in the hell you think you're doing. A lawsuit? Seriously, Mike? Are you that desperate for a handout? You threw me and my daughter out of our home. What did you expect me to do? Send you a thank you card? I expected you to be a man and get on with your life. That's what normal people do. Instead, you're running to some bottom-feeding lawyer trying to squeeze money out of mom and dad. It's pathetic. Truly. I'm not trying to squeeze anyone." I shot back, my grip tightening on the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "I'm trying to get back what you stole from me. You and them. We didn't steal anything. The house is mine. Mom and Dad gave it to me because I'm the one who's going to carry on the family legacy. Not you. And as for the money you supposedly put in, consider it rent. You had a pretty sweet deal for 7 years, living practically for free while I was out in the real world, building a career." Every word was a calculated jab, designed to demean me, to reinforce the narrative they had told themselves for years. Nathan the success, Michael the charity case. And then he delivered the final blow, the one meant to shatter any lingering hope I had. "Look, Vanessa and I are having a housewarming party this weekend. A big one. All our friends, all of their friends. We're celebrating our new home, our new life. The life you could have had if you weren't such a goddamn failure. Don't worry, we won't send you an invitation." He hung up. I stood on that ladder, shaking with a rage so pure it felt white-hot. A failure? I had raised my daughter alone since my wife died giving birth to her. I had held a steady job, working remotely long before it was fashionable. I had maintained their house, poured my sweat and my savings into it. And this was my reward, to be called a failure by my spoiled, entitled brother. The memory of signing those papers came back to me then, with horrifying crystal clarity. It wasn't a calm, normal day. It was a nightmare. Emma had been sick, really sick. A raging fever of 104. A terrifying trip to the emergency room. the doctors talking about meningitis scares, my mind a frantic, prayer-filled mess of worry. We had just gotten home, hours later. The fever had finally broken, and she was sleeping, exhausted. I was a zombie, emotionally and physically drained, running on nothing but adrenaline and fear. That's when my father showed up. Not with soup, not with a comforting word. He had a manila file of papers in his hand. "Michael, sorry to bother you now, son," he'd said, his voice oozing a false concern that made my skin crawl in retrospect. "I know you're wiped out, but the insurance company needs these signed by tomorrow. It's just a renewal for the homeowner's policy. I've marked the pages. Can you just sign here, here, and here?" I remember looking at the stack of papers, my eyes blurry with fatigue. I saw official-looking letterheads. I saw words like policy and premium. I didn't have the energy to read the fine print. This was my dad. My father. You trust your father. So I signed where he pointed, my only thought being to get back to my sick little girl's bedside. He hadn't just asked me to sign. He had waited for my weakest, most vulnerable moment. He had weaponized my love for my daughter against me. That wasn't just greed. That wasn't just favoritism. That was pure, premeditated evil. The anger galvanized me. I climbed down the ladder, my movements stiff, and called Elaine back immediately. "They're having a housewarming party," I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. "They're celebrating. Let's give them something to really celebrate." We amended the lawsuit. We filed for an emergency injunction to halt any sale or refinancing of the property until our case was heard. We detailed the fraudulent signing, specifying the exact date and the circumstances surrounding Emma's illness. We were drawing a line in the sand. A few days later, a certified letter arrived at the cabin. It was from my mother. I tore it open, my heart pounding, expecting more venom, more justifications. But it was just one sentence, scrawled on a piece of expensive, cream-colored notepaper. "You are tearing this family apart." I stared at the words, the staggering, monumental hypocrisy of them burning a hole in the paper. I was tearing the family apart? They had taken a stick of dynamite to the very foundations of our family and then had the gall to blame me for the explosion. I walked over to the bare wall in the living room and tacked the note up with a rusty nail. It would be my reminder. A reminder of what I was fighting against. Not just for a house or for money. I was fighting against a version of reality they had manufactured. A twisted narrative where they were the benevolent victims and I was the ungrateful villain. Elaine's voice on the phone a few days later was grim. "Michael, they've hired Braxton and Finch, a top-tier law firm. The best, most ruthless litigators in the city. They're not going to roll over. Their initial response is clear. They're going to paint you as a disgruntled, jealous brother who's trying to extort his loving, generous family. Then we have to prove they aren't a loving family," I said, my eyes fixed on the note on the wall. "We do," she replied. "But our case, as it stands, is built on your testimony about your contributions and the fraudulent signature. It's strong, but it's not a slam dunk. They will attack your credibility. They will twist your words. They will try to break you on the stand." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Michael, we need a smoking gun. Something they can't deny or twist. Something irrefutable. Right now, we don't have one." Her words hung in the air long after the call ended. I looked around the half-finished cabin, at the stack of unpaid bills on the makeshift table, at the single hateful note tacked to the wall. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket. I felt like I was bringing a knife to a gunfight. But then I looked at a photo of Sarah I had placed on the mantel, her smile bright and confident. And I remembered something else. Something my grandfather had told me years and years ago, on a fishing trip on this very lake. A story about a promise. It was a long shot, a whisper of a memory against the roaring gale of my current problems. But right then it was all I had. The search for that smoking gun had just begun. Life at the cabin settled into a new, demanding rhythm. My days were a carefully balanced act. From dawn until the early afternoon, I was a construction worker, a plumber, and a landscaper fueled by coffee and how-to videos online. I learned to plaster walls, to sweat copper pipes, to lay flooring until my hands were calloused and my back ached. Every nail I hammered felt like an act of defiance. Every board I sawed felt like I was rebuilding not just a house, but my own sense of self-worth. In the afternoons, I was a teacher. I homeschooled Emma at our sturdy new kitchen table. We worked on math and reading, but her real education came from the world around us. She learned the names of trees, the calls of birds. The city had always made her anxious, a bundle of nervous energy. Here she was a different child. She was calm, curious, and fearless. She spent her afternoons collecting pine cones, skipping stones on the lake with a skill that was quickly surpassing my own, and drawing pictures of the deer that sometimes wandered into our yard. This was our sanctuary, and the more I built it with my own two hands, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting to get the old house back. I was fighting to protect this new one. But the lawsuit loomed over us, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety. Elaine was right. We needed more. The memory of my grandfather's words kept nagging at me, like a song I couldn't get out of my head. We had been sitting in his small aluminum fishing boat on this very lake. I must have been about 15, complaining about some perceived unfairness with Nathan, how he'd gotten a new bike while I'd had to save up for months for a used one. My grandfather, a quiet, thoughtful man with kind eyes, had reeled in his line and looked at me. "Family is complicated, Michael," he'd said. "People aren't always what they seem. Your father, he sees your brother's flesh. He sometimes misses your substance. But a man's word, his promise, that's what matters in the end. And I've made sure you'll always have a piece of this family. A solid piece. Something no one can take from you. I've put it in writing." At the time, I thought he was just being philosophical, offering a bit of grandfatherly wisdom. Now, his words felt like a map, a hidden clue in a story I was only just beginning to understand. One afternoon, while clearing out a dusty closet, I found an old, rusty tackle box. Inside, among the dried-up worms and tangled lines, was one of my grandfather's favorite fishing lures, a simple silver spoon. Holding it in my hand, the memory of that day on the lake came flooding back, not as a vague recollection, but with vivid, urgent clarity. "I've put it in writing." I called Elaine immediately. "My grandfather," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He told me once he'd put something in writing to make sure I was taken care of. Could he have meant a will? A different will?" "It's possible," Elaine said. Her professional curiosity instantly piqued. "When did he pass away?" "About 10 years ago, just after I graduated from college." "And your father was the executor of his estate?" "Yes." A significant silence on the other end of the line. "Michael, if your grandfather had a will or a codicil that named you as a beneficiary, and your father, as the executor, never disclosed it, that's not just fraud. That's a felony." The hunt began. We started with public records. The only will on file was a standard one, dated years before his death, leaving everything to my father. There was no mention of me or Nathan specifically. It seemed like a dead end. They wouldn't have filed it if they were trying to hide it, Elaine reasoned. If it exists, it was suppressed. We need to think outside the box. That's when I thought of Mrs. Gable, Eleanor Gable. She had lived next door to my family for over 50 years. She was a sweet, sharp-as-a-tack woman in her 80s who had watched me and Nathan grow up. She had always been kind to me, often slipping me a freshly baked cookie when my mother wasn't looking, giving me a conspiratorial wink. I drove into town the next day and knocked on her familiar green door. She opened it, her face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. "Michael! Good heavens, child! I was so worried. Your mother told everyone you'd taken a sudden job offer out of state and left in a hurry." The casual, calculated lie stung, but I pushed it down. I sat in her cozy living room, surrounded by photos of generations of happy families, and told her everything. She listened, her teacup rattling in its saucer, her expression changing from confusion to horror, and then to a steely resolve. "That woman," she said, shaking her head, referring to my mother. "I always knew there was a cold streak in her. All image, that one. And Robert, bless his heart, letting her lead him around by the nose. And the way they spoiled that boy Nathan rotten. She confirmed everything I had told Elaine about me doing the yard work, the repairs, about how dedicated I was to Emma. Your father barely knew which end of a hammer to hold, she scoffed. You kept that house standing, Michael. Your grandfather saw that. He saw it all. Then I asked her the crucial question. Mrs. Gable, do you remember anything about my grandfather's will? She paused, her eyes looking into the distance, searching through decades of memories. Your grandfather, he was such a good man. Fair man. He worried about you, you know. He saw how things were with your parents and Nathan. He told me right here in this living room not a month before he passed. He said, I've made things right, Eleanor. I've made sure Michael gets his share, so he's not at the mercy of his mother's whims. My lawyer has it all down, solid as oak. My heart leaped into my throat. His lawyer? Do you remember who it was? She tapped her temple. Oh dear. It was that firm downtown. The one your father used to work for as a paralegal years and years ago, before he went into sales. Had that fancy name, Crestwood. Something? Crestwood and Associates. It was the key, the missing piece, the connection that made everything click into place with a sickening thud. My father had worked for the very law firm that drafted his own father's will. He would have known exactly who to talk to, what to look for, and how to make it disappear. I thanked Mrs. Gable, my voice thick with emotion, and called Elaine from the car, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the phone. I've got it, I said, my voice electric with excitement. Crestwood and Associates. Elaine was all business. Okay, Michael, this is huge. If a will was drafted there, they are legally required to keep a copy on file for a certain number of years, even if it was superseded or declared lost. An ethical firm would never destroy it. And if your father used his former position there to access and conceal it, we've got them. We've got our smoking gun. The drive back to the cabin was different. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter. The fight wasn't just a desperate scramble anymore. It was a targeted mission. I wasn't just the wronged son. I was the grandson on the verge of fulfilling his grandfather's last wish. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had betrayed their own father. And I was about to expose it all. The day of the hearing arrived cloaked in a gray, drizzling sky that perfectly matched my mood. The courtroom was an imposing, cavernous space. All dark wood and high ceilings, smelling of old paper, floor wax, and raw anxiety. I sat next to Elaine at our table, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. I'd worn my only suit, which felt tight and foreign. Across the aisle sat my family, a united front of tailored arrogance. My father, Robert, looking grim and important in an expensive suit, his jaw set. My mother, Patricia, her face a mask of cold indifference, not a single hair out of place. And Nathan, next to a visibly pregnant Vanessa, whispering in her ear and smirking in my direction. They looked at me not as family, but as an insect they were about to swat, a minor annoyance in their otherwise perfect lives. Their lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Harrison from Braxton and Finch, started first. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark. He painted a picture of a generous, loving family who had supported their less successful, unmotivated son for years. He called me a disgruntled and opportunistic man, twisting my years of contributions to the house into the desperate actions of a freeloader trying to secure his position. He presented the signed transfer deed as the final, irrefutable proof of my consent. When I took the stand for cross-examination, he was relentless. Mr. Whitmore, Harrison began, circling me like prey. You are a software developer, are you not? A man who deals with complex information for a living. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. And yet you're asking this court to believe that you, a man of above-average intelligence, signed a legal document transferring ownership of a property worth nearly $1 million without reading it? Does that sound like the action of a competent adult to you? My daughter had a fever of 104. My father told me it was an insurance renewal. I trusted him. Harrison scoffed, a theatrical sound meant for the judge. You trusted him? Or you saw an opportunity after the fact when your more successful brother was given the house to extort money from your own family? Isn't it true that you were jealous of your brother's success? He kept hammering away, trying to make me look foolish, greedy, and incompetent. I could feel my parents' and Nathan's smug glares from across the room, willing me to break. But I just focused on Elaine's advice. Tell the truth, simply and clearly. Look at the judge. Don't get angry. Let them. Then it was Elaine's turn. She was calm, methodical, her presence a stark contrast to Harrison's flashy theatrics. She called Mrs. Gable to the stand, who testified beautifully and with unshakable conviction about my years of unpaid labor and my grandfather's statements. Harrison tried to dismiss her as a confused old woman with a faulty memory, but Mrs. Gable's mind was ironclad, and her righteous indignation on my behalf was palpable. Elaine then presented the financial records, copies of the property tax checks I had written from my personal account, receipts for thousands of dollars in materials for repairs I had made over the years. The foundation of their freeloader narrative began to crack, piece by piece. But the final act was the one that changed everything. Your Honor, Elaine said, her voice ringing with quiet confidence. The plaintiff would like to call a final witness to the stand, Ms. Carol Beardsley, a woman in her late 60s, with a kind, grandmotherly face and nervous eyes, walked to the witness stand. I had never seen her before. I glanced at my father. His face had gone pale, a sudden, shocking loss of color. He knew exactly who she was. Ms. Beardsley, Elaine began gently. Could you please state your occupation for the court? I'm retired now, she said, her voice soft but clear. But for 40 years, until 2018, I was the head records clerk and notary at the law firm of Crestwood and Associates. A murmur went through the courtroom. Nathan leaned forward, whispering urgently to his father, who just shook his head slightly, his eyes wide and fixed on the witness. Ms. Beardsley, in your capacity as a notary, do you recall a client by the name of George Whitmore, my client's grandfather? Oh yes, a lovely man, a true gentleman. I notarized his last will and testament myself, back in 2013. Elaine placed a document in front of her. Is this a copy of the signature page of that will? Yes, that's my signature. That's my seal. Harrison shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. The official will on file has already been entered into evidence. Patience, Mr. Harrison, the judge said, leaning forward, his expression now one of intense intrigue. Let's see where Ms. Martinez is going with this. Ms. Beardsley, Elaine continued smoothly. This will was a simple one, leaving the estate to his son, Robert Whitmore. But do you recall if there was anything else? A codicil, perhaps? An amendment to that will? Carol Beardsley took a deep breath, her hands folded in her lap. Yes, there was a codicil. Mr. Whitmore was very specific about it. He came in a week after the will was made. He said he'd been thinking, and he was worried about his younger grandson, Michael. He wanted to ensure he was protected, no matter what. My breath caught in my chest. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. And what did this codicil state? Elaine asked, her voice clear as a bell. It stated, Ms. Beardsley said, looking directly at the judge, that upon the sale or transfer of the family home at 1212 Chestnut Lane, 30% of the property's appraised value was to be paid directly to his grandson, Michael Grace Whitmore. The courtroom was utterly, profoundly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The air crackled with tension. And what happened to this codicil, Ms. Beardsley? She looked down at her hands, a flicker of old shame in her eyes. A few days after Mr. George Whitmore's funeral, his son, Robert, came into the office. He'd worked there as a paralegal years ago, so everyone knew him. He asked to see the file. He said he wanted to make copies for his records. He was the executor, so I gave it to him. She hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. He was in the records room for a long time. When he came out, he seemed flustered. He said the original codicil must have been misplaced, and that his father must have changed his mind and destroyed it before he died. He asked me to dispose of our office copy. He said it would just confuse things and go against his father's final wishes. And did you? Elaine asked gently. No, she said, lifting her chin, her voice gaining strength. It felt wrong. Mr. Whitmore had been so insistent. He called it Michael's nest egg. So I marked the copy as potentially lost original and filed it in our deep storage archive, just as procedure dictated. I retired a few years later and forgot all about it. Until your office called me. Elaine turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have a certified copy of that codicil, retrieved from the archives of Crestwood and Associates under subpoena. She picked up a document from her table and walked it to the bench with deliberate, measured steps. The silence was broken by a strangled gasp from my mother. My father had slumped in his chair, his face the color of ash. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. But it was Nathan's reaction that I will never forget. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his parents, his mouth slightly agape. His face, once so smug and arrogant, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. It was the look of a man who realized the perfect, gilded life he had been handed was built on a foundation of lies. Not my lies. Theirs. The golden child had just discovered his throne was made of cardboard. The judge read the document, his expression grim. He looked up, peering over his glasses, first at Ms. Beardsley with a nod of thanks, and then at my father. Mr. Whitmore, he said, his voice dangerously low, you will have a lot of explaining to do, and I suggest you do it with a criminal defense attorney. The gavel came down like a thunderclap, the sound sealing their fate. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been excavated from a decade of lies and brought, finally, into the light. Leaving the courtroom felt like walking out of a long, dark tunnel into the blinding sun. My legs were shaky, my mind numb. I hadn't just won. I had been vindicated. The truth, my truth, had finally been heard and validated in the most public way possible. But the victory was complicated, tinged with a profound sadness. Seeing my father crumble, my mother's horrified expression, Nathan's look of utter betrayal. They were still my parents, my brother. A small part of me felt a pang of something, not pity, but a deep, sorrowful ache for what our family could have been, and now never would be. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for them. The judge's ruling was scathing. He ordered the immediate payment of 30% of the home's current appraised value to me, which came out to just over $240,000. He also formally referred my father's case to the district attorney's office for investigation into felony fraud and concealment. The public humiliation was just beginning. The financial blow hit Nathan and Vanessa the hardest. They had already spent a fortune on renovations, tearing down walls and installing a high-end kitchen with Italian marble countertops, all on credit, assuming the house was a golden goose. Now, they were suddenly on the hook for $250,000 they didn't have, with a mortgage based on the home's full value. The night after the verdict, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Vanessa. Her voice, usually so smooth and confident, was shrill with a panic that bordered on hysteria. You have to stop this, Michael, she pleaded. No preamble, no apology. You can't take this money from us. We'll be ruined. We'll have to declare bankruptcy. This isn't about you, Vanessa, I said calmly, the detached tone in my own voice surprising me. This is about what was stolen from me. This is about honoring my grandfather's wishes. Your grandfather is dead, she shrieked. This is about now. Nathan and we have a baby on the way. Don't you have any compassion? The hypocrisy was so breathtaking it was almost funny. Compassion? I repeated, the word tasting like acid. Where was your compassion when you stood by and let my family drive me and my 7-year-old daughter to a cheap motel and abandon us? Where was your compassion when you called me a failure for living in the very house you were so desperate to get? You'll have to figure it out, just like I did. I hung up the phone, my hand steady. The pressure cooker of their perfect life exploded. Jason, who still had friends in their wide social circle, reluctantly gave me the updates. The screaming matches between Nathan and Vanessa became legendary, sometimes spilling out into their perfectly manicured front yard for the neighbors to hear. He blamed her for pushing him to be so greedy for her expensive tastes. She blamed him and his crooked, lying family for dragging her into their mess. The dream house became a battleground. In a desperate move, Vanessa called her wealthy parents, begging for a bailout. This was the second twist, the one I never saw coming. Her parents, who had flaunted their wealth at the lavish wedding, flatly refused. Their reason, as Jason told it, was cold and simple. They didn't want their family name associated with fraud. They hadn't raised their daughter to marry into a family that cheated its own kin. The support Nathan and Vanessa had counted on was entirely conditional, and they had just violated the terms. Their marriage, built on a foundation of status and money, began to crumble the moment both were threatened. The stress took its toll on my father. A week after the hearing, he suffered a minor heart attack. He recovered, but something in him had broken. The arrogant, domineering man I had known my whole life was gone, replaced by a frail, frightened old man confronted with the public consequences of his own deceit. My mother, however, remained stubborn, her pride a fortress. She called me once, her voice laced with the old, familiar venom. "I hope you're happy now," she spat. "You've destroyed your father. You've destroyed this family, all for a bit of money." "No, Mom," I said, my voice weary but firm. "You and Dad did that a long time ago when you decided one son was worth more than the other. You destroyed it when you lied to your own father's memory. You just finally got caught." The true turning point for her came from an unlikely source: social media. Jason's wife, Clara, had been posting photos of our life at the cabin. Pictures of me and Emma fishing on the lake, our faces beaming. A picture of the thriving vegetable garden we had planted together. A picture of Emma proudly holding up a painting she'd made in our new, sunny living room. They were simple, happy photos, snapshots of a life being rebuilt. For my mother, they were daggers. She saw her granddaughter happy and thriving, in a life from which she had completely and utterly erased herself. She saw the birthdays she would miss, the school plays she would never see, the daily moments of joy she had traded for a house and her pride. The realization that she might never see Emma grow up, that she had chosen bricks and mortar over her own flesh and blood, began to eat away at her. The house on Chestnut Lane, the symbol of their victory, became their prison. Weighed down by debt and legal fees, Nathan and Vanessa were forced to put it on the market. But with the lawsuit now a matter of public record, and the market having cooled slightly, they couldn't get the price they wanted. The dream home was now an albatross around their necks. They finally sold it to a developer for a steep loss, who, in the final bitter irony, tore it down a month later to build 2 modern duplexes. The legacy they had cheated for was reduced to a pile of rubble. The seeds they had sown had grown into a bitter harvest. A year passed. It was a year of profound change, for them and for me. While their world was contracting under the weight of debt and shame, mine was expanding in ways I never could have imagined. The money from the settlement arrived in my bank account, a number with a lot of zeros. But by then, it felt almost like an afterthought. It was a symbol of my victory, a validation of my fight, yes, but my real success was being built every day, right here at the lake with my own 2 hands and my own mind. During those long months of rebuilding the cabin and fighting the lawsuit, I had an idea born of pure necessity. I was struggling to juggle my remote coding job, Emma's homeschooling, and the endless color-coded list of repairs for the cabin. I needed a simple visual tool to organize my projects, my time, and my life. Existing apps were too complex, built for corporate teams. So, in the quiet hours after Emma went to bed, fueled by coffee and a burning need to create order out of my personal chaos, I built it myself. It was a simple, intuitive project management app designed specifically for freelancers, solo entrepreneurs, and single parents like me. It had a clean interface and features that helped manage the chaotic blend of work and life. On a whim, and with a nudge from Jason, I released a free beta version online, posting my story on a few forums for single parents and developers. Took off. People responded to its simplicity and its story. My story. They understood the need for a tool that wasn't about corporate synergy, but about survival and reclaiming control. I was an accidental entrepreneur. Within that year, my little app, which I called Lifeboat, had gained thousands of paying users. The name felt right. It had been my lifeboat, and now it was helping others. The first big check from the App Store felt more real than the settlement money. This was mine. I had created it. I hired my first employee, Jason, who was tired of his soulless corporate job and jumped at the chance to build something with me. We officially founded our own small software company, Lifeboat Solutions. I could work from home, set my own hours, and never miss a school project or a chance to go fishing with Emma. My success wasn't a lucky break from a new tech campus being built nearby. It was something I had forged myself, out of my own necessity and hard work. The cabin was transformed. What was once a dusty, neglected shell was now a warm, beautiful home. I'd added a large deck that overlooked the lake, where we ate dinner most nights. We had a thriving vegetable garden that produced more zucchini than we could eat, and a tire swing hanging from a massive old oak tree that was Emma's favorite spot in the world. The house was smaller than the one on Chestnut Lane, but it was infinitely bigger in every way that mattered. It was ours, built not on lies or inheritance, but on love, resilience, and a whole lot of sweat. Then, one sunny Saturday afternoon in late summer, a car I didn't recognize pulled into our long gravel driveway. A woman got out. It was my mother. She looked older, smaller, and more fragile than I remembered. The hard, defiant anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. She stood at the edge of the yard, by the garden, not daring to come closer. "Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The house, they sold it. For a loss." I just nodded, saying nothing, waiting. "I see the pictures," she continued, her voice breaking, "that Clara posts online. Of Emma. She looks so happy, so grown up." Tears began to well in her eyes. Real tears, not the crocodile tears of self-pity I was used to. I wanted to see her. It wasn't an apology. Not the one I deserved. But it was a crack in the wall of her pride. The old me, the me from a year ago, would have caved instantly, desperate for any crumb of maternal affection. But the man standing before her now was different. I had built a life without her. I had built a fortress of self-respect around myself and my daughter. "I'm not going to let you hurt her again, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "Or me." "I know," she whispered, looking at the ground. "I wouldn't. I just miss my granddaughter." I thought for a long moment, looking from my mother's broken figure to my daughter, who was happily reading in the tire swing, oblivious. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you could just flip. But Emma deserved to have a grandmother, if that grandmother could learn how to be one without causing harm. "You can see her," I said finally. "Here. For an hour. While I'm here." I set the boundaries. The visits would be supervised, on my turf, on my terms. It was the beginning of a long, slow, and awkward process. A few weeks later, my father came with her. He looked me in the eye, his own gaze watery and filled with a shame I never thought I'd see. "I'm sorry, Michael," he said, the words heavy and halting. "For everything. I was a fool. A proud, selfish fool. It was a start. The wound was too deep to ever fully heal, but maybe, over time, a scar could form." As for Nathan and Vanessa, their story had a different ending. After selling the house, they separated. The financial strain, the public humiliation, the ugly truth of their family's foundation. It had all been too much. The perfect couple, built for show, couldn't survive a real crisis. Last I heard, Nathan had moved to another state, trying to start over, away from the wreckage he had helped create. I learned that sometimes, the best thing that can happen to you is having your life completely torn apart. Because it forces you to pick up the pieces and build something stronger, something better, something that is truly, authentically your own. This evening, as the sun sets over the lake, painting the water in shades of orange and pink, I'm sitting on the deck I built with my own two hands. Emma is on the tire swing, her laughter carrying on the breeze as she tries to go higher and higher. Push me, Daddy. To the moon. I smile and give the tire a gentle push. In my pocket, my phone buzzes. It's a notification from my bank. The final payment from my parents' settlement has cleared. The $240,000 is sitting in my account. A year ago, that number would have been my entire world, the sum total of my vindication. Now, it feels like a footnote, an epilogue to a story that's already over. The money is useful, of course. It will go into Emma's college fund, into growing our company, into securing a future that is stable and bright. But it isn't the prize. The prize is this: the sound of my daughter's laughter, the solid feel of the deck beneath my feet, the knowledge that every single thing in our life is honest and earned and real. We built this. My parents and I are still navigating our new reality. The visits are awkward, filled with long silences and the unspoken weight of the past. Maybe one day it will feel normal again, but I doubt it. Some things, once broken, can never be put back together exactly the same way. The trust is gone forever, but we are trying. And for now, that has to be enough. The real home I was fighting for wasn't the one on Chestnut Lane. It was never about the wood, the plaster, or the address. It was about finding a place where you are valued, where you are safe, and where your love is returned without condition. The betrayal from my family, as painful and deeply wounding as it was, forced me to stop seeking that validation from them and to build it for myself. They threw me out of their house, but in doing so, they led me to a home I never would have found otherwise. A home built on truth, on resilience, and on a father's fierce, unending love for his daughter. A home where she will never, ever have to question her place in the world. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to fight for something you believed in, even against the people you were supposed to trust? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.